I've had way more fan art and fan response from a book than I ever got from games. I sold millions of copies of games, but the connection with people with books is totally different. It's been very, very, very like rewarding and crazy, and like people get tattoos. It's wild.
Hello, YouTubes and listeners. Thank you for joining me. I'm Nicholas W. Fuller. I'm a writer, I'm a gamer, I'm an interviewer, and on my YouTube channel, I like to talk about books and games and look for fun ways to bring those two passions together. But today, I get the wonderful opportunity to talk to Book Talk sensation, the New York Times bestselling author of Legends Lattes, Travis Baldree. Hi, Travis. How you doing?
Hi, Nick. How are you? I'm doing just fine.
It's good to hear. Seriously, though, Travis published works read like my own personal fantasy, including he's got Legends Lattes, which he just put out. Has it only been 1 year? It's only been 1 year-ish.
It's just been barely over a year, yeah.
Good Lord. And you've got Bookshops and Bone Dust, which is coming out late this year, right? Mm-hmm. You worked on video games, including Fate, Torchlight, Torchlight 2, Rebel Galaxy Outlaw. I asked you audiobooks, and you said hundreds, but many people probably know you from Will White's Cradle series, The Ripple System, Beware of Chicken. And it turns out you're actually really good at all these things. You're a New York Times bestseller, 5 months ABA Indie Bestseller List, Nebula nominee, Goodreads Best Fantasy Choice nominee, Barnes & Noble Best of 2022, Indie Next Pick, Library Reads Pick, and also GDC Best Game Studio debut. You even friggin' sang a part of Legends and Lattes narration. And at that point, I was just like, this isn't fair at all. Like, what can't this man do?
So many things.
How do you do it? Are you secretly Fae or something? Are you know?
No, I'm just desperately incapable of sitting still.
I mean, you're doing good with it.
Thanks.
But I guess the trade-off, though, is every time I see you, you're in this tiny little broom closet of a room. So, like, that has me... Like, listen, if there's a problem, just, like, blink 5 times and we'll find a way to get you out of there. Like...
I don't think I can blink anymore.
Oh, no. All right, we're coming. We're coming. It was, like, what is the story of the little room?
This is my audio recording booth. So, I'm in here a good 5 or 6 hours almost every single day. So this is where I record audiobooks. It's called a Studio Bricks. It weighs about 1.5 tons. And it's got this treatment on the walls for sound reflection. And theoretically, it keeps out other sounds unless you have children, in which case nothing can keep those sounds out. But you do your best.
I understand that predicament very well. Yep. Although my 2-year-old... Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
No, my 2-year-old daughter is at daycare right now, so that much is handled. Like, she can't, I won't hear her from there. But anyway, what were you going to say?
This is also where I write, because there's no distractions. I thought when I started writing that I would be one of those cool people who, like, takes their laptop to a coffee shop or sits down on a couch somewhere and, like, Nope, I have to write in here because there's no snacks to get up and go get. There's nothing. There's nothing else to do. So it's both fortunate and unfortunate. It's nice in here. I like it, but it's a long time to be in a box.
Right. Yeah. Right. I imagine that's wild. Like, I wanted to get into that. I'm really curious about, like, what your average day is like. I really didn't imagine that you writing in there. I am kind of one of those person that likes to go to the coffee shop, but it is because that's actually a less distracting place for me. Like, I don't feel like I can get on Facebook and Reddit every 5 seconds chronically while I'm there so much, and, like, there's other people around. Anyway, but so what is your average day like?
An average day for me, mostly it's recording audiobooks. That's my day job, and I'm scheduled out for years, so I've always got something to do. So I get up in the morning at 5, I do my workout, I make my breakfast, I make the kids' lunches, I get my kids ready for school, and then I trot downstairs and get into this booth, and I record about an hour and a half of audio in the morning, which takes 2 to 2.5 hours. Take my lunch break, and then another hour and a half of audio in the afternoon. And and then I go pick up the kids, and theoretically, I have a free evening. Theoretically, when I'm writing, my free evening is writing, because I didn't really plan out my schedule with writing in mind. So up until now, the books that I've written have been get it done in the evening, write every day until the book is done, and then not. I'm attempting to restructure my life to allow for both to exist simultaneously in a way that isn't maybe so ridiculous. But that's the way it's worked up till now.
That's pretty wild. Are you kind of, I mean, that seems like a pretty structured day. Do you really like stick to that structure all the time, or does it vary? Because I kind of get the impression that you're sort of like a binge writer also.
That's the way I always do everything. I try and have my audiobook schedule be regular because it's easier. When you work for yourself, it just makes sense to structure your day in a way that you get things done. So I also work live for audio. So I have a Discord channel where people pop in while I'm working, which again is really good for me because it keeps me on task. It's like a water cooler, and just the very mild pressure of knowing that somebody might pop in while I'm off getting a snack just keeps me from going off and getting a snack. So it just keeps me with my butt in the chair getting work done. As far as binge writing goes, I only have so much of a sample size. I've written 2 books, but both of them, I write every day until I'm done. I write 1 chapter every day until it's done. And if I stop, I feel like it's like any habit. It's like not doing your workout, or it's not doing your whatever. You get out of the habit, and it's very easy to start to justify it to yourself more and more. So for me, that's what works so far. Maybe I'll change everything once my circumstances change and I've shifted my schedule more. But I'm likely to try and do this because it feels more schedulable to me. It's like, okay, this is an X chapter book. I've outlined it. I can know this is approximately going to take me this long. I'm just going to get it done.
Man,
hopefully. Now, that's not to say that everything goes according to plan.
Sure.
So the first book I wrote was a NaNoWriMo book. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, that's a National Novel Writing Month. I did it in November of 21, and it took a month. And the second book, I also planned to take a month, and I had it fully outlined, which is what I discovered I had to do to write a book. I tried to be a pantser for like decades and failed miserably, but I would still prefer if I were a pantser, but I'm not.
I love that I listened to your interview, SFF Addicts, I think, and you were saying, you wish it was like this mystical, transcendent experience, but it's not. And like, it's amazing how much fucking easier it is when you have a plan. Like,
it's work. It's work. I mean, there's obviously a creative element, but at the end of the day, it's work. And planning it like it's work for me makes it possible.
Right.
So I tried to plan everything out for the second book, and it didn't go well. I didn't like the first 20K words I wrote. I hated them. Just the story wasn't working for me, so I had to throw it away and then desperately try and start again until I finally got something that worked. So I suppose I also have to plan for disaster.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You say like 2 books, but like I'm gonna call that like 2.5. You wrote so much of that other one.
Yeah, I probably wrote 40,000 words of failed book, between the other versions that I tried to start. And yeah, scrap. I harvested many organs from those books. I got stuff out of it, and I learned a lot about myself, but yeah, it's a lot of words to throw away.
Yeah, right. You're like harvesting organs, crying at the same time. Right, I understand.
Yeah, there was a little bit of crying.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so let me get... that was one of my later questions. Let me get to one of my earlier questions.
I'm sorry. I just ramble all over the place. That's just
no, you are absolutely perfect. I think it's fun to have more of a conversation. We start with a plan, but right?
Yep.
Yeah. But so you used to read to your kids, right? And that's how you got into audiobooks, as I understand. Right?
More or less, yeah. I mean, I read to my kids and my wife for a long time, and we listened to audiobooks. Frank Muller's my all-time favorite audiobook narrator. He did a lot of Stephen King stuff before Frank passed away. And also, I have probably heard Harry Potter, Jim Dale like 8 billion times because my wife didn't used to be able to go to sleep without hearing something. So she listened to those books on CD, of all things, over and over and over again.
What would she do when the CD ran out? To start from the beginning?
Theoretically, she would be asleep by then.
Oh, okay.
That was the ideal,
Yeah.
Fingers crossed you're asleep. But, yeah. So just kind of immersed in that. And nobody needed me to read to them anymore. And I had the equipment for game dev for doing some voice recording, and I decided to do it. And I ended up liking it.
Yeah. It's awesome. Now that it's your full-time job and you do it, successfully your years out, have you thought about going back to your kids and asking for back pay?
No, they would never give it to me. They haven't listened to a minute of anything that I have narrated. They could care less. They have no interest whatsoever. They've never read a word I've written. They've never listened to a word I've recorded. It's just not their bag. So
that's funny. I wrote a novel 10 years ago that's like a trunk book, but my wife hasn't read my trunk book either, so like I get it. How many kids do you have? Just curious.
Two. 18 and 13.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I've got two. Old. They're 9 and 2, my kids. So
nice.
Like, yeah. It's they're very. It's the hardest work, but the most rewarding work.
Yeah.
But I understand why maybe they don't. The 18-year-old is kind of aged out of dad reading to him, I guess.
I even because it's been years. It's just neither of them ever cared. I think it's probably the fact that if they are doing anything, it almost always involves an audio component. They're playing a game, they're watching YouTube, they're listening to music. They're always doing something with an audio component. And that audio component is not going to be their dad as far as they're concerned.
Well, what do they think, though? Like, because, they've seen their dad kind of go viral on, like, book talk over this. No, they're totally, like, unaware?
No, I think children are really just kind of, like, uninterested in adults. For the most part, and I don't blame them. I don't remember being that interested in adults either.
Yeah.
So I'm not. My feelings aren't hurt. I'm not actually that surprised. It's just. So even they're all about their own thing.
I mean, fair, but even the fact that you used to make video games, they're like, whatever, Dad. That's work.
I mean, my youngest likes programming and will take minor bits of advice from me. Nothing, not much.
Right.
I think there's a basic acknowledgement that might be cool. Maybe that has bled into their consciousness a little bit.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. They'll get there eventually. But with the audiobooks, I'm curious. I've heard you I listened to the video where you're talking about the different cradle voices and just like even the words that you're using to describe your voice and how you're talking seemed technical, not words in my everyday parlance. So did you do any like formal training for this or?
Not much. I think I've done maybe like 90 minutes of coaching really early on in my career, but for the most part, it's the same way I learn anything else. It's like analyzing something that I like, breaking down the parts of it into why I like it or why it works, and like taking it apart and putting it back together. It's also the way I learned to program games. I would replicate a game that already existed. I would take the mechanics and stuff, and usually I'd like extract the art, and I'd like, can I just make the same thing, which gives you an innate understanding of why it works. And I think that you can kind of apply that to basically everything. Just take it apart and put it back together, and why does this do the things it does? And when you understand why, it makes it a lot easier to intentionally do those and then make them habitual. And I think I treated audio the same way, and effectively I've treated writing the same way, kind of interlocking with reading other people's work out loud a lot. You just evaluate those things, you change, you evaluate, and then you iterate over and over and over again.
That's that's what engineers are like when they're kids, right? They just take the things apart and put them back together while their parents go, "What are you doing?" Right.
I think it's a really valuable thing to use in creative fields that I think a lot of people shy away from, for the same reason that people want to be pantsers. They want this creativity to just flow from them and to just manifest, and that's like the only honest creativity is creativity that is only born of feeling and desire. But I think there's just a lot of boring work that goes into facilitating creativity. It's like playing a musical instrument. You want to play the guitar and play some transcendent musical solo, you have to do the basic work of getting the finger dexterity and playing your scales and learning the fretboard and internalizing these elements that to give you the platform to be creative. And I think a lot of times, especially for things like writing less so. There's a lot of information about the technical aspects of writing, but things like voice acting, it's very floaty. You got to feel it and get the author's intent, but these things feel very vague to me. So I prefer more concrete, actionable observations.
No, I completely agree with that. I like the talking about writing. I like the Brandon Sanderson lectures on writing because I feel like a lot of his advice is so concrete. It's not
it's practical.
Exactly. Yes.
Practical, actionable advice, but it's about real things. And talking about it and being able to articulate to other people why you feel something is true is helpful in clarifying your own thoughts, I think. Just really crystallizing your observations and what you've taken away from what you've learned.
Love it. Yeah, well stated. I find that a lot of authors, and it is the case with you, with the exception of Brandon Sanderson, almost nobody starts out and is that's kind of their first job almost, So you've had a few jobs. You said you probably kind of unpaid worked on your family's dairy while you were a kid. You were IT help desk, then webmaster, software engineer, designer, game studio head, then audiobook narrator and author. How did the transition from what I assume must have been milking cows to IT help desk come about?
I shoveled a lot of crap as a kid. I grew up on a farm. It was my dad's dream. He had a dairy. It eventually failed, and we moved up to Washington from Texas. But he still wanted to have kind of a hobby farm. So I grew up in 4-H and FFA and showing animals. And if you've seen Napoleon Dynamite, this is probably not that far away from my life. And I didn't want to do that. That was not for me. No shade thrown on people who choose that life, but it just wasn't for me. So I wanted out. And I typed in programs on a Commodore 64 as a kid. I wanted to program, among other things. I wanted to be a Disney animator too when I was young, until I figured out that just involved drawing ducks over and over and over again. But yeah, so when I briefly went to college, I did some software engineering, but I was doing it on my own anyway, and they weren't teaching me the things I wanted to know, and I was frustrated with college, and so I dropped out and went to work for the Seattle Seahawks as their webmaster, because I was doing a lot of website stuff at the university. And I was with the Seahawks for
I worked for this professional NFL team as a webmaster.
It sounds cool, but I was sitting on the floor for my first few weeks because it really wasn't about. It was just I felt very vestigial.
Weird. All right.
I graduated to some particle board across 2 filing cabinets. I was only there for 6 or 8 months, and then I went and worked for a startup doing 3D website stuff. And then I rapidly kind of made them make games through force of will, and just because I just kept doing it. And so I did, I made games for decades, I guess, a long time. And I was good at it. But it's kind of like a hard business. It's very taxing to do. The relationship with customers is kind of fraught and not really healthy, is how I'm going to say it. But the industry was good to me, and I was good at it and I was successful at it. But I started doing audiobook narration on the side, aforementioned, because I had some of the equipment and my kids didn't need me to read to them. And I turned out liking it, and I just kept doing it on the side. And it came to a point where I was like, I could just do this.
Yeah.
And the community of people is just so very different than the community of people in game development. It's just a lot more diverse. It's filled with book people. It's not all white dudes in their 20s and 30s. It just feels really different, and it was very welcoming and nice. And so I ended up switching. Shipped my last game, kind of retired quietly. I just left my company sitting there, and then went and did audiobooks, and have not looked back. I don't regret it for a second.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. So when I was in high school, I didn't have to work too hard. and I spent like a lot of time playing games. And then I finished high school, and I'm like, what if I make games for a living? So this time, this was 2004, and there were two places that you could go in the country that would teach specifically making games. There was DigiPen, and there was Full Sail. And I lived close to Full Sail, and I was like, well, I'm going to go there. Then I'll get they just started a bachelor's degree. I get a bachelor's degree in less than 2 years. I'm going to learn to make games. This is great. And it turns out that making games is really hard.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, it was really kind of like a computer science degree, and I had never programmed at all before. And so you're trying to get a computer science degree in game development in 22 months. And it was, that turned out to be quite difficult. Yeah.
And well, in game development, it's not just learning one thing and then doing it. It's learning over and over and over and again, because the industry moves so fast. Game genres move so fast. Technology moves so fast. Everything is antiquated in 3 years. No skill you learn persists. You can build other skills off of them, but like modeling, if you were an artist and you're modeling a 3D character, a decade ago, it's nothing like doing it now. None of it's like the textures aren't done the same. The lighting model isn't the same. You're probably using ZBrush and then, decimating. Nothing is the same. And the same is true on the technology front. Things are always advancing. And in a lot of ways, it gets easier because you have these kind of like democratized engines that a lot of people use, like Unity and Unreal, where the barrier to entry for those things is much lower, but you still have to make the thing. And then what happens is, as that democratization happens, the market basically gets flooded with really good stuff. Once upon a time, it wasn't the only thing you had to do to stand out was be good. Now that's not enough, because most things are actually pretty good. Games are pretty good. And so now to stand out, you have to be singular and good, and have like a viral component, and it's constantly changes. So that's cool, especially if you like to learn new things, because you're constantly learning. But it's also like a challenging train to get on, because it's going fast and you got to keep running to hop on.
And like, I imagine challenging to stay on, especially while you're trying to like raise a family and, right?
Yeah. There's not that many old people in the game industry.
Right.
And if they are, they're usually at an executive level.
Yeah.
There just aren't. You have your exceptions, but by and large, there aren't. Because it's taxing, and the scale of what people expect grows.
Right.
Really, really rapidly. And people don't have a very good distinction between like what Rockstar makes for $1 bajillion with a team of God knows how many, and what 3 people in a basement make. There's people don't know what's going on behind the scenes, so they don't judge them that way. Yeah. So it's an interesting business.
Yeah. So you were the president and lead designer of Runic Games for a while. You worked with ex-Blizzard employees and that worked on Diablo games. At your height, how many people worked at Runic Games, roughly?
Like 31, I think. We were still really small. I kept it small. I didn't want to run a big company because I was still working on the game. I was still like the lead engineer and developing. And it's a lot of energy also to operate a team once you pass the threshold where you can't all sit at the same table in a bar. There's a siloing starts to happen past that. You start to have like, office dynamics that are sometimes challenging to navigate, and getting everybody on the same page can be hard. And there's a big difference between starting a studio built around making one game and then developing a studio that can make anything, because people have their interests and their expertise and their wants, and those don't always map to what the next stage is. So it's just like a whole other thing about like studio maintenance and studio building that isn't just like, hey, let's make this really cool thing. So
that's super interesting. My day job is I make websites primarily. That's a little bit more complicated than that. But at my height, I've only ever had like 5 employees, so I've never really thought of the siloing that would occur at a certain scale. That's fascinating. I suspect that now, if you have a team at all, it's much smaller.
I guess it depends on what you're talking about. On the audiobook front, I have someone who proofs my books for me, and she does my proofing. We work together. I pay her to proof, and that's the person I work with. No, she listens to the audio while reading through the book to make sure that she catches any errors I've made, because there's always errors, and then gives those to me in a sheet with timestamps so I know what to fix, so that when the audiobook is done, it's correct. So that's who I work with now. On the book front, obviously, now that I'm working with Tor, there are people that I work with. Like I have an editor, stuff after the fact, but I'm still working with the editor that I did when I was indie. So I still edit the book myself with my editor before going to my editor. So I mean, this is kind of like the limit of my team, but this is all effectively contract stuff too. It's not the same as having like employees in a studio or anything else.
Right. Yeah. How do you like the difference? Do you miss having a big team, or are you like, no, man, it's so nice not having the responsibility?
Gosh, no, not for a second. No.
Yeah, really. I could understand.
I mean, I like seeing people.
Yeah, you like getting out of your closet.
That's very different. That's very different than liking running a studio.
Yeah. That makes sense. Did you, when you were, I've heard some of the horror stories of games, right? Game development. Did you ever have to sleep under the desk, or was that kind of experience more when you were working for the Seahawks? It sounds like.
Yeah, no, I've never had to sleep on the desk. I mean, I've worked really long hours, and I've worked brutal hours.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something I ever asked anybody else to do. People would do it. There's a certain pressure to doing it, which I don't think is a good thing,
Yeah.
But I tried not to ever ask that of anyone. I'm also, though, super anal retentive, and if something needs to be done and I think it will be better because of it, I would put in the hours to do it, which is, not that healthy. We could talk about game development a lot. It depends on how much you want to talk about game development. I have lots of thoughts, but there's so many unknowns in game development.
Yeah.
You have a limited amount of money, you have a limited amount of time, and you're solving generally a problem that you've never solved before. Then maybe nobody's solved before, and it has to be entertaining, and it has to meet all of these vague criteria. But you're trying to predict how long it's going to take you to do something based on never having done it before, only having done something that's maybe adjacent to it. It's very hard to predict things that way. And when millions of dollars are on the line and people's livelihoods, it's stressful.
Yeah.
And so there's a very complicated, especially as an indie studio, there's a very complicated relationship with work, which is not necessarily a healthy one, but it feels to me like it's inherent with what you're doing.
Right. I think, it seems to me that some of that is also inherent with creative fields at that scale, because I think maybe it's not as bad, but I don't think movie people are feeling relaxed all the time.
And they have similar things. Movies are often like moving like the VFX bar, or they're trying to some new challenge, that hasn't been done before to make their movie stand out, because so much VFX happens these days. If you were just filming like a drama of some people sitting in a coffee shop, I imagine it's a lot easier to schedule that and do it on time. And also the amount of monetary investment's less, so the risk is less. But if you're making a Marvel movie, that's a whole other thing. They just don't.
Right.
By the same token, if I was a software developer and all I was doing was making solitaire, I mean, I could predict that really well, but maybe nobody's buying my solitaire game. So it's this weird tension. Things like audiobooks don't really have that. They're not technologically bound. It's a person is going to sit and read this. I know how many words it is. I know about how fast I go. It's going to take me about this much time. It's infinitely more schedulable and predictable in a way, and short in a way that software engineering and game development isn't. Writing a book is probably closer, because again, you're maybe solving problems you haven't solved before. There's unknowns. You're like, I know the shape of the story I want to tell, but I can't tell you for sure if this is going to work until I put these words on the page and I can feel it. And so there's a certain amount of that unknown, but also there aren't, a bunch of you doing it, and you're not worried about somebody else's payroll for somebody else. So,
yeah. Plus, at least when you're writing your debut, you're not under contract. You have infinite time.
No expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
No expectations.
Right. What a different ball game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So, let's look at games from a different point of view. You still like playing games?
I do. I'm very picky. And I very seldom finish a game. Because I'm intolerant of content padding for the most part. People want enormous games at this point, and I honestly, as a game player, generally don't. That's not hard and fast. Like Breath of the Wild is one of my most favorite recent games. And it's a vast game with a ton of content, but it doesn't demand that you experience all of it. It kind of lets you do what you want within that framework, and it's also just kind of a peaceful game in a lot of ways. So it's soothing in a way that others aren't. But like, I can't play MMOs, you know? If anything pops up with a progress bar for me to do something that's intentionally wasting my time, I nope out immediately because my time is so valuable to me. I just can't do it. But I also, I completed the Demon Souls remake on PS5, which I loved. It was great. I thought Demon Souls was too much of a pain in the butt back when it came out on the PS3? Was it the 2? I don't remember. I don't even remember which one it was. I feel like it was the 2. But a lot of that probably had to do with the frame rate and the load times to respawn and yada, yada, yada. And again, now that it's so respectful of my time, I get right into it.
There you go.
But yeah, I'm just super picky. I would like to have played more Elden Ring than I managed, but it was so huge. There was so much that I just didn't have time to do it.
Right. Yeah. I hear you. I played MMOs when I was like a late teenager and that sort of thing, but like it's been a long time, you know. I think the last one that I really enjoyed was the World of Warcraft like beta and like initial release. That was fun in that time, you know.
Yep.
But
I remember I played WoW with my wife and some other folks, and it was earlier WoW where it was a lot slower to level. And I remember I did my first raid and I fell asleep in the raid while people were preparing. So I was like, this is my signal. This is not for me.
And it was a 40-man raid too, right?
No, it was like one of the first raids. I don't remember how. It was one of the first raids.
Okay.
This has been a long time.
Yeah.
It was one of the early raids, and I was bored to tears.
I liked playing WoW, and I liked doing some PvP and whatever. But like the raids never got me, and a big part of it was because I think it's sort of similar to you, where I just didn't have the patience, but in a different way, like the patience of getting at that time. Like a lot of the raids in the very early WoW were 40 people, and you have to get them all together,
all together.
Yeah,
see, that sounds like work. It sounds like a meeting to me.
Yeah.
It sounds like assembling a meeting. You know, getting everybody to show up at a venue. You know, it just sounds like work.
Right. Yeah. Not fun. But I have spent way too many hours on like Civ 6. You know, like that's a good times. What's your like favorite game of all time? Is it Breath of the Wild you were mentioning? Or?
For now, I'll probably say Breath of the Wild. You know, if I'm not going off of just pure nostalgia and what I probably liked most at the time I played it, I'd probably say Breath of the Wild because it's really well designed. I'm amazed they got it working on that hardware. It was really brave in its design in a lot of ways. I think it's just really, really well executed.
That's so. I mean, so many people like that game, but like your reasons for it are like nobody else is going to say like what a brave design and amazing that they got it working on that hardware. That is a game developer's like perspective, you know.
Well, I mean, you look at what Zelda did over a period of time. You had like the big sea change with Ocarina of Time, which really was incredibly innovative, and that's an amazing game, and maybe I should say that because it's like largely considered one of the best games of all time, and it is. But then they kind of mined that vein forever and just kept doubling down on it. And then Breath of the Wild was them finally saying, okay, no, we're going to do something totally different. It's not going to resemble that in any way. We're going to introduce all of these new mechanics all at once, and we're going to approach this world building in a way that we've never done before. And it was just innovations across the board everywhere again. And, you know, it's really impressive. If I were to say, just from like a pure technical perspective, like Red Dead Redemption 2 is just unbelievable. I can't believe they managed to make that game, but it's still like a massive evolution over the previous other game of Red Dead 1. It's just more and better of all of that. But I still have no idea how they did it.
So I haven't played Red Dead or Red Dead 2. So like, tell me, I
mean, it's a cowboy simulator. It's a cowboy simulator with incredible fidelity, an unbelievable amount of content and variety, so much voice acting, so much cinematic work. You know, all of the weird little details that they added to it they're frankly ridiculous. And the fact that they got it all running on that hardware at the fidelity they did is also technically impressive. It's just, it's hard for me to conceive of assembling that much content into something that polished. It's a lot.
Yeah. That was Rockstar Games, though, right?
It was. And
they have a money machine in one,
they do, but you still got to build that stuff. Somebody still has to build that and pull it together into something coherent that doesn't come apart at the seams. And
that's true.
For something to maintain like a narrative tone throughout that and actually tell a compelling story and be well acted is, again, it's pretty gobsmacking.
It's true. It's a good point. We learned with Rings of Power that it's not a money machine does not just make good story, right?
No, it's really easy to waste money. I mean, Star Citizen.
Oh, snap. Shots fired. But fairly
less money was spent on Red Dead. And,
wow.
They actually shipped that game.
Yeah.
What is it? It's like $650 million raised for Star Citizen or something?
Star Citizen stands.
That's a lot of money to make a kind of a creaky bait. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. I mean, how much did they raise on that Kickstarter? Anyway, that was a lot.
At this point, I think it's up to $650 million or something.
Are you
Some ludicrous
serious?
amount of money. Yeah, because it's been going for how many years? When did they announce that thing? 2000?
Yeah. It's been a long time. And I know that like every spaceship or whatever, and it's an in-game asset, and they're usable, whatever, but they're like hundreds of dollars, especially for the bigger ones.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who's participating in that and they get their joy out of it, great. I don't want to naysay it. You know, if that's your deal and you want to spend money and invest in the idea, cool, enjoy it. But from like an actual, it's just hard for me to conscience that amount of money being spent on something that is so barely holding together.
Yeah, right. And it's gonna, like, all the work they've done up to this point, as you were kind of saying, is gonna be kind of obsolete in like 3 years.
The longer it takes, the more obsolete it gets, and then that's your excuse, some point down the line to keep the money train going. Now we're gonna need some additional funds for the technology upgrade. It's gonna make it capable of doing, whatever.
Yeah.
Just
yeah. So I'm going to be doing some content soon that I think might be fun. Trying to kind of bridge this book and game gap. I have a friend of mine who's a writer also, and he's never played Diablo 3, so we're gonna like book club the Diablo 3 story, like play through and kind of discuss the story and stuff. What did you think of like the story in Diablo 3?
I don't even remember it.
Yeah,
I'll be honest. I vaguely remember 1 and 2's story. He gets the crystal put in his head at the end of Diablo 1, and then he's the wanderer in the other one, and kind of following it from places. But to me, the stories were always really secondary to these. They're just an excuse to have very different kind of biomes to hit loot pinatas in. So I am not the person to ask about Diablo lore, because it just sort of like phases through me. For most games, that's the case, actually. I don't absorb most games' stories unless it's really a game that's about the story, so I can tell you what happened on The Last of Us. But, in a lot of games, for me, the story is mostly just the excuse to do the thing.
Fair.
I'm the person that will try and listen to all the quest dialogue for like the first maybe 45 minutes until I start impatiently just hitting the button.
So it's funny because like I do have kind of a similar experience where like a lot of times too when I play a game, like it's for socializing. I'll play with like my brother and like some friends and that sort of thing, and the story is kind of secondary. But because of that, I am kind of excited to go and experience like some of these, I haven't played Last of Us. I haven't played BioShock Infinite. I have Knights of the Old Republic on my phone, and I haven't played that. But like all these games have good stories. Never did play Mass Effect 3 yet. I played 1 and 2 when they were great, So it should be fun to kind of go through and experience those stories. But it's, we kind of hit on, I believe you put it at some point of like book people versus kind of game people. And I think and you definitely said it earlier in our conversation, how people with games have like unrealistic or very specific unrealistic expectations for games. And
there's audience overlap. Obviously there's plenty of book people who are game people, right?
Right.
But there's a large contingent of game people who aren't really book people.
Right. And then likewise the other way, there's book people that are like, I don't want to play a game.
Yeah, I don't want to play a game. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But there's, I think, kind of talking about the expectations of the audience. I think everyone kind of understands what goes into writing a book on a fundamental level. Like everyone can write a little bit, and they know that like doing that for 100,000 words is actually hard. maybe not a concept of just how hard if they haven't tried it, but like, whereas like you were mentioning, like sometimes game players have no concept of like the different work that's involved with three people making a game in a basement that's this weird little indie fun thing versus like a Red Dead Redemption 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you talk a little bit about kind of, how you've embraced book people and how you appreciate that diversity and that sort of thing?
So I think there's just like a difference in expectations for like what you're getting. When you buy a book, if you don't like the book, you just put it down and you don't finish it. Like how many people have DNF'd a book? But if you DNF a book, the worst you do is you go on Amazon and you're like, I didn't like this. 1 star, it was terrible, or some, more reasonable response. And then you put it down and you get on with your life and you're done. You don't expect them to change the book, or like, I didn't like the ending. I'm going to make a petition that you rewrite the ending to book 3. And because there's no expectation, you don't have any expectation that you're going to influence this. This story already exists in the world. It is what it is, right? When you ship a game, users in general have like the understanding that they can influence it because you're going to patch it. There might be bugs. It's been established that, studios will alter their games for the customers. They're a live service at this point, and books aren't. So there's this division of expectation in how involved you are in influencing the thing that you're interacting with. I think also that one of them feels like books are art and you appreciate them or you don't, and games are a product and they need to fulfill your needs. And there's some different perception there, which is kind of hysterical because it'd be way cheaper to change a book to suit somebody than it would be to change a game to suit somebody. Like the amount of money involved and effort involved in changing a book is way less than altering a game for an audience. And honestly, I think people do often think they know how games are made. There's a lot of people, you just slap multiple. This game did this, you could do it. This game did this, you could do it. But there's a lot of under the hood considerations and design considerations that may make that not the case. So there's maybe a little Dunning-Kruger going on there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think in general, readers as a whole tend to be more diverse, a little bit more empathetic, because I think reading makes you more empathetic. I think you're viewing somebody else's perspective on the world and being confronted with it and having your preconceived notions challenged. And that's part of fiction. It's not necessarily about you. It's about someone else. It's about somebody else's story. This is not your story in this book. This is someone else's story, and you're being exposed to it. And games, it's your story. And if you don't like it, it's because somebody isn't serving you correctly. And stories are not built that way.
And it's you impacting the world on the game, right?
It's all about your achievement and your advancement and your ultimate resolution. And books aren't. So I think there's just empathy built in with reading books that manifests in the audience. And I think that you can see when that changes in things like GameLit and Lit RPG, where it starts to bring over some of the expectations of gamers, where like, no, actually this book really is kind of, I want this book to be about me. I want this book to be wish fulfillment for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that the expectations of story change in the comments that you read on Amazon or Audible or whatever in GameLit versus other kinds of literature. I'm not trying to bag on GameLit. I'm just saying you can see this overlap in perspective there.
Yeah.
That's some of the Venn diagram overlap between gamers and book readers in a very specific way. That's kind of interesting to observe.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about the empathy angle, but you're absolutely right, and that's super fascinating. And it clearly impacts kind of the expectations and whatnot. When you were working in games, did you ever receive like different like fan art, especially like kind of physical fan art stuff?
I mean, sometimes, yeah, and there was like a Penny Arcade comic about Torchlight, which we all adored, and so occasionally we would get some fan art, and there's been like some Torchlight fan art, but it's not like I don't feel like it was a huge thing because none of the games that I worked on were largely like character driven games. It wasn't like there wasn't like a mascot character. Again, it was mostly about whatever character you made. You maybe picked a different face and a hairstyle and a whatever.
Right.
So there's some, but it's not, I don't think it would be the same level as something that was more character focused.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is the coolest or most recent piece of fan art you've received?
Somebody made a custom Lego set and sent it to me that had the characters custom made with like custom pieces and like a custom sign. He sent me a mini kit and I put it together and it's amazing. I'm just blown away. I've had way more fan art and fan response from a book than I ever got from games. I sold millions of copies of games, but the connection with people with books is totally different. It's been very, very, very like rewarding and crazy, and like people get tattoos. It's wild, and it's just very. It's hard to express how nice it feels when that happens, because books are more personal. Like you're putting something of yourself, your own perspective on things into a book, and when somebody else connects with it and sees it and says, "I like that. I understand that." That's really like validating, not about your work, but about the fact that like I exist with other people in a world that understand things that I understand. It's a way of like not being lonely. It's a way of, there's this very profound human connection to that is hard to overstate. And so when you get something like fan art, it's built on something like that. And it's, I don't even know how to talk about that. It's great.
I saw the pictures of that Lego and that was amazing. How did it, like, I mean, the little minifigures, how did he do that?
He 3D printed some of the custom parts, and some of them, I think there's some Lord of the Rings bits in there from like some of the Lord of the Rings sets.
Sure.
But like,
that's actually,
so yeah.
That's really clever, the 3D printing. I didn't think about that, but I could totally see how that would be easy way to do that, you know, like a fairly like some straightforward. I can see the
fact that I couldn't tell and that they had been polished a little, because there's usually kind of like the printing lines and stuff, and
sure.
I couldn't tell. It's super cool.
That's amazing. It's
sitting right over there. I'm looking at it.
Is it in your booth?
It's just outside. We've got a little bookshelf across the room.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't reach over and grab it, but I can see it through my little window.
Oh, so you do have a window in your booth?
Yeah, thankfully.
Okay.
Otherwise, it might be a little bit too creepy. And also, when my wife comes into my office, she can wave and get my attention without freaking me out.
I used to play drums a little bit, and like my mother, I was young, she would like come and like talk to me while I'm playing, and I wouldn't freak me out. I'd throw the sticks and whatever.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
oh yeah.
So, I mean, I love that. If you were trying to, let's say, like, I mean, there's a fan of like Torchlight or Diablo, and like I think that there's a pretty good, like, someone that enjoys those games, if they were willing to give it a try, they might really like the Cradle books. What would you tell them to like kind of, you know, get them interested in books and kind of being more involved with kind of the book culture, and you know what I mean?
I'd probably give them a kind of like an overview of what progression fantasy is, which Cradle kind of pretty squarely is set in. It's this, there's stories about people who start at the bottom and acquire power in ways that's really a lot of an analog to how you level up in games through, you know, tenacity and skills and magic and whatever else, to ultimately go to some crazy pinnacle of power, ideally with, you know, compelling narrative paralleling all of that weaves the two together. You know, for Cradle, when people asked like, what's Cradle? And I would say, well, it's kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but for slightly older people. And you can look at something like Avatar, and Avatar is progression fantasy. It is. Aang starts out as everybody starts out as like nothing, and then they're all super cool by the end. You know, you're having these crazy battles, you know, and you find out really early on like the disparity between the low end and the high end, and then you're traveling and doing crazy stuff and learning new stuff, and at the end you have big climactic events.
Yeah, you do 100%. I haven't drawn that comparison before, but like, yeah, I totally see it. Yeah.
You know, or Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball is probably an easy way to say to a lot of people, because that's also basically like kind of
sure.
this sort of wish fulfillment progression fantasy.
Yeah. Neat. Yeah, I think that's a good way to bring him in. And also, you know, maybe enjoy a story where you're not the center of things, and but yeah, right. So I asked you ahead of time what one of your favorite books was, and you said Royal Assassin. I believe that's the Robin Hobb book, right?
Yep. Elderlings. Yeah.
So this is one of my favorite last questions for an interview. I get to ask you ahead of time what that is, and now I am going to read to you one, maybe two 1-star reviews of your favorite book. And feel free to just cut me off at any point and be like, what are they talking about? Anything, like that sort of thing, all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, 1-star review from Amazon. The first book in the series was decent. Not good, but not bad enough that I stopped there. This book is something else. It really is one of the few worst books I've ever read. Vague spoilers follow. Everyone in it is unbelievably and unfathomably stupid at all points of the story. They allow friends and family to be killed, and the kingdom basically ruined because, well, what? They're supposed to do something about the villain they know to be evil and bent on killing them, and who lives in their power? That was kind of a poorly constructed sentence, to be honest. That's okay. The plotting was so bad and the characters so stupid as a necessity for the terrible plot to work, I was angry with the book by the time I was a third or so of the way through, probably less. What do you think?
They're just not on board with Robin Hobb's kind of emotional damage.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. People just want really different things out of books, and that people do dumb stuff. People do irrational things, especially people who are like emotionally. A lot of the characters in Elderlings are pretty emotionally damaged because of the things that happen to them from a young age. So they don't, and their circumstances are odd. They're not standard circumstances. So expecting them to act like some well-adjusted normal person acts is, maybe not reasonable. But some people want the characters to act the way that they would act.
Right.
And if they don't, they must be morons. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes people do, like, this character is supposed to be the smartest person in the universe, and now they're just doing the stupidest thing imaginable, and they're ignoring this very obvious way to solve their problem. And there's legitimate criticisms to be made of books any number of times. But in this case, these people are pretty effed up.
Right. All right, I'll read one more, and then I won't make you suffer through more. All right, one more. It says, not sure why I kept reading. I guess in the end I thought it would get better. Sadly, I was mistaken, and all these powerful characters ended up being powerless to deal with a pathetic and weak prince. Even though they still knew what he was up to from the very start. Talk about ignoring the elephant in the room until it sits on you. This world has so much promise, the author would be better off creating the world and have someone else tell the story. That person wrote a review like a gamer would.
Why didn't they just, there's all kinds of reasons why people don't do stuff. And, anyway, I'm fine with them being wrong. I'm fine with them having their own opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's allowed to be wrong about something. It's fine.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Any kind of closing thoughts you have for this audience?
Gosh, no. Be kind. Be kind.
I like that. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Truly, you're my first guest that's not a personal friend, and you were my kind of shoot for the stars guest, and I've had a blast talking with you. It was as much fun as I thought it would be. Thank you. Where can people find and follow you online?
I think most people find me on Twitter at Travis Baldree, and I'm also, on Instagram and TikTok, I guess, but mostly Twitter. And I'm just Travis Baldree everywhere. I don't have a weird handle or anything.
There you go. And thank you for watching or listening. If you'd like this video, please like and subscribe. I'll have many more interviews in the future because I really enjoy it. And if no one's told you today, you're an absolute legend.